Ciao! Welcome back to the Good Marshals Universal Podcast. Yes. May the force be with you.
Is that today?
What?
Is that today?
No.
Oh.
I just said may the force be with you, not may the fourth be with you.
Oh, I was like, whoa, it's March.
I was going to say, whoa, it's not May.
The other day was Super Mario Day. It was March 10th.
Awesome.
Super Mario.
Yeah.
10th, yeah. Anyway, today we're talking about training. What exactly constitutes training? What do you think constitutes training? We're talking about martial training, of course, but I think, a lot of times martial artists, we tend to look at martial in all aspects of our lives or many aspects of our lives. Maybe not every aspect of our lives, but so, Keith, what do you think constitutes training?
Well, I think the question has a misleading quality.
Oh.
In that it makes you want to say, here's the one thing.
Yup.
But training is not one thing.
Agreed.
There has to be a physical component. There has to be a partner component. There has to be a pressure component. There has to be a thinking component. And it takes all of that. It can be argued that the student that only comes to class and that is all they do, that they are training. Their training is limited, it is weak, but they are indeed training.
Yeah.
It can be argued that the person who is writing a book about the history of a lineage or about a collection of techniques and is doing nothing but writing them. They had some prior experience or something, or they're talking to knowledgeable people. It could be argued that they are in effect training to some degree. All around general training requires all of it. All of a sudden it came to my mind, and I may have mentioned this before, about 15 years ago or so, I read a study. They were trying to isolate this concept of muscle memory. The muscles have no mechanism to actually remember. It's the brain remembering the load on joints and things like that and stuff like that. So they did a study, had three groups. Control group, which was sat in a room and just twiddled their thumbs. Another group that sat in a room and watched professionals throw basketball free throws. Another group that went out and tried to throw free throws. And they found that the group over the control group, the group that just watched, improved almost as much as the people who tried. And in some individual cases were better because the people who tried had no instruction, whereas the people watching videos were watching pros. They were getting instruction, whether they knew it or not.
Right.
So
Monkey see, monkey do.
well,
we have these things called mirror neurons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it's a form of instruction. You ask your instructor, how do you do this? The first thing you do is you watch them. There's the three kinds of learning, those who see, those
Visual, auditory.
right, and do.
Yep.
Ultimately, we're all a mix of all of those. We're not isolated to any one. So when you say what constitutes training, there are so many aspects. And ultimately, all of them, to achieve the best that you can achieve, you must apply all of them. And that means getting out there, watching someone,
Yes.
trying it, failing, succeeding, trying under pressure in terms of a martial art,
Failing,
succeeding.
Yep.
And then you and I would probably take it to one more level in terms of how far you want to go, teaching.
Yeah.
Because teaching requires you to
Understand.
not just understand, you may acquire understanding while teaching.
Mm-hmm.
It requires you to think about it from so many different ways, with so many different assets or facets.
Sure. That was what I was thinking in terms of understanding.
How do I explain this to a noob?
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when you get into like really
Detailed.
esoteric things like sensitivity. How do you explain this to a noob?
Yeah.
And you'll explain it one time to one noob, and then you'll explain it another time to another new person, and you'll find a different way of saying it.
Sure.
And all the while you're building pathways that gives you a much deeper understanding.
Sure.
So it's funny you asked this question because me and Marshall have argued about it for like 2 weeks. He sent me a study. So I'll give preface for the argument. It wasn't really an argument. We agreed, and it became semantics. But he was saying, well, do you guys do drills? And I was like, yeah, like kind of. We kind of do drills, yeah.
Yeah.
And then he was like, well, why don't you play more games? And I was like, well, like sometimes the drills are games. And that's where the semantics started, right? But he had shown me this study article, right? And it was on people playing soccer. And one group was essentially just given constraints and rules and then told to go, right? And they just played. And then one group did like drills, right? Kicking the ball back and forth, very one-way back and forth things.
Right.
The group that was constraint-led did better, right? So, but to me, it posed a question. I was like, okay, you can tell them all this crap, and that might work for soccer, but we're doing martial arts. I feel like there's so many different angles to approach in teaching martial arts that drills have to be necessary, even if you're understanding or learning rather at a significantly shorter rate. That's very thorough understanding you have at that slower rate in drilling. Now, I don't think you should drill something. I mean, you shouldn't beat a dead horse, right? But I mean, if you can do it like 3 times really good and then weave it into a game or something like that. Or if as you're doing the game you notice people are having issues, you're like, hey, try this, right? Just kind of being there and leading people in how you say it. And I like how you say it the best. You say play, right? Let people play. Play in your head, right? You're thinking about it when you go home, yada, yada. That's really about being good at training is how you train, right? And then, sparring, of course. Anything where you have an objective of winning is a good way of training, period.
Yeah, so what he's talking about is the constraints-led approach, or sometimes it's called the ecological method.
Yeah.
It's been around for a really long time, and essentially, if you don't know what the constraints-led approach is, I'm not an expert in it, but basically, like if you put a constraint on an objective, let's say you're sparring, right? But you say, the objective is for you to beat and get a counter strike, but you can only use one hand, or you have to keep sensitivity in the bind. And your goal is to find when they're strong and then disengage and find their hand, but you have to close your eyes. Right?
I like that.
So these are constraints that you put on a drill.
Yeah.
And then it has a specific objective.
A specific one.
But what happens is we find that because adaptability to be able to do a skill when you're not allowed to do the skill, or the ability to do a skill when it is not the most present, or the ability to create an opening to be able to do that skill, that essentially skill,
Yeah.
that skill of adaptability is far more important than technique. It's far more important than just drilling fendentes.
Yeah,
Right?
no, nobody should be just.
And nobody should. And I think
Right.
that that's where a lot of constraints-led approach guys piss off a lot of classical guys because we see that if you just practice technique, you don't get better at actually performing under pressure. You don't.
Yes.
So there's a lot of classical guys that just do drills,
Form.
or forms,
Yeah.
but they don't go live with it. They don't, and it's not just pressure testing either, because like you can pressure test a thing and the guy giving pressure is only giving one level of pressure or one specific kind of pressure. You need to create environments that are not usual, or they're not the same, because you're never going to be in the same environment when you do a technique. You could do a technique on one guy and then do it on the same exact guy 2 seconds later, and the environment is different. So it's not necessarily about the technique, right? Now, this goes back to what you were saying earlier, that there are multiple facets to training. And if we only focus on one facet of training, yes, you're still training, but you may not develop the skill that you want to develop.
Yeah.
Or you might just really only want to be good at forms. You may only want to be good at, history. You may only want to be good at something, right? Whatever.
That's what I was gonna say. Is it's kind of like whenever you do, it's so many traditions do have such a long-lasting lineage that I can see the point for drilling if you're teaching them in that lineage. That's because you have now nitpicked everything to be a certain way, and you now have to tell everyone why it's a certain way. But that becomes a study. Just like in HEMA,
Yeah, it
when
becomes
we pick up the book,
like a curating
historical
study.
I don't think that's bad. And I think that is something that is probably better reinforced through drilling, but that principle should then go into practice.
If you
right?
want,
if you drill, it should go into something else.
If you want to compete, if you want
Yes.
to be a actual sword fighter, then you should be able to sword fight.
That
But
face.
Mike,
We get
serious.
neck braces and do Mincer real quick.
No,
serious, though.
so let's take the idea of all you're studying is forms.
Yep.
You can compete with forms,
Yeah.
and that's a pressure.
I was talking specifically for HEMA.
Yeah.
But
Because you don't. There are no forms competitions in
Right.
HEMA.
I should start a
But-
form competition in HEMA. I should do that at
all you
Midwood.
need is a form that people
Best
agree
form
on.
wins.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of the public conversation,
Yeah.
a person who is studying karate who really likes forms has to go through all levels of training. The pressure may look different. It may not be sparring or corner drills or anything like that. It may be, no, you got to go out in front of those people and you got to do it. And you got to start on that red dot and you got to end on that red dot. That's pressure.
Yeah.
Having been an applied piano major, I didn't have to beat anybody up with a piano, but I had a lot of
Stage.
pressure
Yeah.
going in front of it's called the
absolutely.
jury,
Absolutely.
where you sit down in front of all the instructors at the music school and you have to play.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know all about this from my son.
And I cracked under that pressure, honestly.
Yeah. It's hard.
So, so all levels still apply, even though you've isolated a part. And that would, again, training. If you're a ballerina, you train.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you're either a so-so dancer and you show up at the local dance school and you only dance during dance class, or you think about it and you watch videos and you and yes, I'm a ballerina, but I can show you some jazz and I can show you some modern, and I can, because I look at other things. And I went, I'm just making this up, I went to the Met and danced in front of 3,000 people. Oh, you pressure tested your dance.
I like that. I like
It's
that.
still, I mean, it's
Good way of putting it.
all levels have. It depends on your goal.
Sure.
Your goal will define your training, but training itself, good training is all encompassing.
Yeah.
Sometimes that goal is getting to that live play if
Yeah.
you're not already there.
Yeah.
I can say that from being in like some kendo schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
This goes for most kendo schools. You're not doing shit for 6 months, but this pretty much, and then you have Bogu, and then you're still waiting for like 3 months to spar.
You do a lot of footwork.
You do a whole lot of footwork, but I mean that's got a good reason why it is
Yeah.
funky footwork.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's like
Well, that's again. That's
if
a part of it.
if I walk into like a kendo school now after having competed several times, of course I've got to honor what they've done, but I'm gonna sit there and going like, well, damn, I want to spar too. That's why I came. They have a really good game, and I think they could change some of the approach to it and use more of that,
Maybe.
play-based learning.
Well, I think they
teaching.
do.
Last one I
Again,
had been to was very traditional.
Kendo is a specific practice,
Yeah,
and they're very good at what they do,
yeah,
and what they do is very specific. I don't think that they need to change what they do because they're not trying to be anything else.
true.
If they were trying to be something else, yeah, then they would have to change. But
Well, I don't see all the same dudes with the same narrow stance. I see dudes with wider stances
maybe
quite often.
sometimes. But
Is that
is
common? Is that
But as
allowed?
long as they can do the right footwork, and as long as they can show intent when they strike and call it out and do all the necessary things to get a point, then that's fine. Because even
because
sometimes
the goal to
people
get a
are like,
point is very specific.
yeah. I mean, I've heard people say you can't do passing steps in kendo. Yes, you can. You
Yeah,
absolutely can.
I've seen that.
But with the way that you show pressure on a cut or show pressure on a strike requires you to look a certain way, requires you to do a certain thing, requires you to have the right spirit. And sometimes passing steps don't lend itself to that. Sometimes they do.
I'll say it helped
But
me
that's
a
just the
lot
thing about
learning
kendo.
learning a little bit of kendo helped me a lot because it changed my regular footwork for sword fighting. I mean, like I went from pretty much only doing passing steps to like, oh hey, I could use simple steps. Forgot about these, So
But
I fight a lot from
There's
those.
two paths of training right there. There's the kendo training, or you taking kendo in order to enhance your training.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll take something and bastardize it to get a little better. There was
Well, that goes
It
to
doesn't.
Ash was
it's
doing
all
like the
encompassing.
shin snipe thing, so I was like, add a thrust to it first, and they'll be like, so they'll go up here and you'll hit them in the shin, and they'll go, well, damn,
Yeah,
they got to
so-
be heavy to hit it, but
In my lineage, there's a few different terms that you'll see used in texts and in writings and things about different kinds of training. There's Tanyin or Talien, sometimes depending on how you say it, Suryen and Sudo. And these three kind of encompass what I would consider training. Tanyin is more physical conditioning. So you have your strength training, your endurance, your the hitting of a post, or doing knuckle push-ups or knuckle planks on concrete like we do to toughen the skin, banging, conditioning the arms, conditioning the skin, stuff like that. That's what we call danyan. It means to forge. It's like forging metal. So it's a physical training. Suryan it means like refinement. It's like a cultivation. And so my lineage founder likes to say that the purpose of our training is Shimshin Suryan, mind and body training or cultivation. So the Tangsuro Training Initiative, if you look at our flag, training is Suryan. It's that That's the Chinese characters that we use. It means to cultivate, to train, to refine. And this is mostly about skill. It's mostly about your mental cultivation, your ability to stay calm and controlled in a chaotic environment, et cetera, et cetera. Pseudo represents more of a philosophical, spiritual kind of training. Pseudo, like if you were to put in the Google search the Chinese characters for pseudo, you would get like Taoist monasticism, like asceticism, like serious spiritual practice. And my Lineage Founder has an entire chapter in both his 1958 book and his 1970 book. He devotes an entire chapter on pseudo, and it's mostly about martial arts can be dangerous. If you're not a good person, you shouldn't be using martial arts to just beat people up, right?
So
he
how
goes into it a
often-
little bit more in other places, but those three types of training cultivate, or they kind of encompass what we would consider training in my lineage.
How often do you see the philosophical, spiritual side
Very
in
little.
martial arts?
Very
little.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Like what arts? Off the top
No,
of your head?
I mean, so arts have it.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at
But
pretty much all martial
what would be
art,
the ratio?
they have that sort of training, but that sort of training is not a usual training that you see people practicing within the art.
Is it a martial training?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So even the philosophy of it and everything
Yes.
could be.
Yes. Because it
Dependent on the goal, though.
so yes,
Okay.
but if you go back and you study, Sun Tzu, right, The Art of War, or you study certain like Qi Jingguang's manual from the 1500s, or you study the Muidoba Tongji from the 1700s, whatever book you want to study, they talk about this concept of war is bad. We don't want to fight, right? So how can we win this fight before it even starts? This kind of concept, this kind of, that lends itself towards
That pre-planning. Yeah, I like
No,
that.
I mean, it's embedded even in like small gesture.
So that is a more modern take on it. That's not really where that came from, but we could say that it's there. We can see that concept in that, even though that wasn't what it was designed for. But this martial art, true martial art, is violent, scary, dangerous.
Yeah.
It's not something that you want to do every day. This is something, so the spiritual aspect of it is something that usually tends to happen after people train for a while.
So it's usually for the guy who went all in.
No, not necessarily. It's for the guy. I remember at one point, Bo posted this thing on Facebook.
What the hell did I post?
And
I post a lot of things on
it
Facebook, so
was-
that scares me when you say that.
It was a saying about a warrior like stroking his sword.
Oh, okay.
Right? Do you remember
I know. Lamenting the social realities while stroking the blade.
Yes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so Bo,
that's a good one.
I think, was a little
Hold
dirty
on.
in his
Let me
mind.
say it again. Lamenting the social realities while stroking the blade.
Yeah. And so what happens there is when you've seen crap,
Yeah.
specifically as a warrior, specifically as a soldier, you will sit there and you will lament the social realities while you are literally
Stroking the blade.
stroking your sword, because
But I hear it in 2024,
I know,
and I'm 21,
you were like,
and
that
it's
is
like,
hilarious.
that's hilarious.
And Bo's
I like what
mine
you
was
said
in the
about
gutter,
it.
but-
I like what you said about it, though. You said something else on it in terms of the character and how it was translated or something.
the very idea of war is just, it sucks. So most people who have been through crap, and it's not just war, just like life in general.
Just violence.
If you've been through crap, you are going to have a more philosophical outlook on life.
My mind keeps saying Karate Kid.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Miyagi was going to teach him how to defend himself, but you got to do this carefully and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Cobra Kai, take his knee out, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To the thought that the spiritual is taught in some way. It is learned in some way. Sometimes the wrong spiritual may be learned because of poor teaching, but it's almost inescapable in anything in life.
Yeah.
I imagine if we all went and took dance, there would be a certain morality that would pop up.
Well, it's not
There would
necessarily
be an
morality.
expected behavior.
not
Like
morality,
an
but
expected behavior, a code
A
of conduct.
spiritual, here's how we collect ourselves, here's how we calm
I think
ourselves.
cultural might be the better
So
word.
I try as hard as I can to stay away from moral and ethical kind of ideas, because that is not a part of martial arts.
Right.
But you were just talking spirituality, and
there's a
Huang He
big
says don't teach
difference.
it to bad people.
There's a big difference,
Okay.
between expecting martial arts to teach ethics and morality,
Yes.
which it doesn't do,
Right.
versus only teaching violence to people who are already moral and ethically good. So what do you think constitutes training? Let us know. And stay tuned, because part 2 of this podcast will be coming out next week. So join us. Like, share, subscribe, comment, do all the good things. And we'll continue this conversation next week. Peace, y'all.